So I think from that perspective, there are a few other obvious points that the regulations or the guidelines seem to have missed, which I think is something that the regulations of other jurisdictions don't seem to have missed. For example, if you look at, I think there's this body in the US called the Federation of State Medical Boards, and they actually analyze the telemedicine practice regulations of all states in the US. And I think a few interesting things that come out from there, at least, is that 49 state boards plus the medical boards of 3 other provinces, whether it's DC, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, require that physicians engaging in telemedicine are licensed in the state in which the patient is located. So one is that. Then in certain states, there is a special purpose telemedicine license that is prescribed. So if you want to practice telemedicine, you have to obtain a telemedicine license. And there are also certain states where if physicians want to provide advice to patients situated in other states, then they are required to obtain cross-state registration as well. How critical is the issue of who is licensed to provide care in the entire scheme of things? So, for example, when I look at Cloud Physician today as a patient or as a customer, how would I know whether you are qualified? And I'm not casting aspersions or doubts on the validity or the credibility of your business, but it's a question that you probably will get asked, right? How can you assure a customer or a patient about the legitimacy of the manner in which you conduct business today, if there are no rules?
I will. I think Dhruv also will have an answer to this because we've brainstormed this for quite a bit. Let me just point towards that fact that you brought up the US point about so many state-wise regulations. This is a pain. We currently work in some capacity in the US, and it is absolutely the wrong thing to do because it just builds in bureaucratic impediments to actually doing things right. Mm-hmm. The key there is not to remove that regulation, but to make it smarter. I'll give you an example. Quackery already exists in India today. It's rampant in multiple areas, both in metros and non-metro cities in India. Telemedicine is not going to solve quackery, but telemedicine gives you an important and very timely opportunity to actually fix it. Because if you have a vetted electronic system where healthcare providers are registered as telemedicine providers or healthcare providers in general, you will have granular detail into their qualifications, where they exist, where they are prescribing medications from, and will have further insight to make sure that your provider is actually a legitimate provider. So let's not forget that telemedicine may be an impetus into fixing the quackery problem. There are 2 ways to look at that. That said, the system should be smarter than what is happening in the US, because the entire premise of telemedicine is to create opportunity for equitable healthcare across state borders. So by putting in guardrails like, someone in California cannot help someone in New York, you're facing the problem there today in the US, where people had to fly from Ohio to go to New York and help people there during the COVID crisis. What they did was create a temporary opportunity to certify doctors from out of state to practice in New York. So you needed to have a smarter system so that mistake is not repeated. Let's not do that in India. So that is a learning opportunity. And yes, if quackery exists today, telemedicine may amplify that quackery, but it also provides an opportunity to fix it.
I would just second what Dilip said. The interstate licensing problem that you have in the United States is one that Dilip and I have encountered. Each of us has close to 20 or 25 state licenses in the United States right now, active licenses. And it is not the way to go. It is not the way that India should go. It takes a long time to get state licenses. It takes a lot of money to get state licenses. There are different incentives that each state board has for creating their own sort of licensing regulations, and those incentives don't necessarily align with the goal of, like Dilip mentioned, equitable healthcare across the country, right? So I don't think that that's the way to go. I got a Karnataka Medical Council license, and it took me about 4 months and probably 5 or 6 visits to the medical council to make that happen. I can't imagine having to do that in every state in India, right? So that's really not, if we are hoping to get access and quality and cost effectiveness in the healthcare delivery system, then creating these barriers is certainly not the way to go. And I think the United States has realized that as well, and that's why they have now come up with, the interstate licensing requirements, the easily obtainable telemedicine licensing requirements, etc. So I think that we should definitely learn from the mistakes others have made and not repeat them. That's certainly something that we should do.
So just for our benefit, so if I'm a telemedicine practitioner in the US today, and if I obtain a specialized telemedicine license, does that allow me to practice across all 50 states of the US, or 50, 51, or no?
Does not.
No.
So it's only the states will give you a specific telemedicine license to practice in that state, and okay, maybe the barriers for obtaining that license may be a little lower than ordinarily, but no, there's no license that would allow you to practice anywhere in the US.
And as a solution, you're saying if you have to learn from that, would you suggest a national licensing system in India, one license that applies across all states?
Absolutely, either a national licensing system in India, or interlink the state licensing board such that they feed into one system where somebody licensed in one state automatically qualifies. There's a centralized database for each state. So the different ways to skin the cat, but yes, the end result should be that.
Yeah, and there should be a specific framework for telemedicine. See, I can understand why US had this problem. It's a legacy problem. Before the technology era, when everything was on paper, that was the right thing to do. You needed to have everything on paper. You needed to have a paper trail. How would you know this doctor is qualified if they moved from California to Georgia? That's fine. But we are in a vastly different framework right now. And just like we skip pages, we need to skip this. What we need to do is have a national registry, have a state-wise registry, which we already have right now. We just need to make it more tech-friendly, where it is tied to prescriptions. Unscrupulous medical shops should not be able to dispense medications that are not linked to a registered provider. And this can all be part of the central, the Bharat Health Stack, or any upcoming medical framework that exists. You need those checks and balances. It can be done at the state level as well. But the idea is that this should be connected and should be tied up to these personal identifiers that we already have pretty much uniformly across the country. So use that infrastructure to make this happen. We did it with UPI. I can't imagine that this is not a solvable problem.
Sure.